Welcome to the StageLeft podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians enter an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. Go to thestageleftpodcast.com for all episodes featuring members of Radiohead, Supergrass, Jungle, Queen, The Lightning Seeds, Earth, Wind and Fire, Guns N' Roses, Fleetwood Mac, The 1975, Oasis, Madness, The Zootons, The Prodigy and Kraftwerk, where they discuss their writing, recording and performing processes, as well as reflective interviews with musicians and producers who've worked with the likes of the Beatles, Beyonce, Elvis Presley and David Bowie. Today we're joined by the hugely respected, innovative jazz pianist Neil Cowley, who won the highly esteemed BBC Jazz Award for Best Album for Displaced, and was pianist for Adele on her groundbreaking albums 19 and 21, playing on Rolling in the Deep, which has had over 1.7 billion views of one video alone on Vivo, as well as accompanying her on an iconic version of Bob Dylan's Make You Feel My Love, which has been seen by a paltry 173 million people in comparison. Today we'll be talking about playing 07, Rihanna, Birdie, Stereophonics, as well as discussing life as a jazz pianist, solo material, playing on later with Jules Holland, would you believe, performing on Midnight at the Oasis by Brand New Heavies, and we'll be finding out if it's really true his dad wrote a song with Bruce Forsyth. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest today on the StageLeft podcast, stifling his laughter as I said that, is none other than Neil Cowley. Thanks for joining us today, Neil. How is it going?
It's going all right, yeah, considering. Yeah, I feel a lot better now we talked about Bruce Forsyth and got that off our...
Is that true then? Is that a true story?
Yeah, the only time I ever heard that track was on Have I Got News For You. For some reason... when Brucey presented that show, Paul Merton reminded him of a B-side that he put out called My Little Budgie, which my dad wrote. It's just about Brucey and his little budgie sitting on his hand, and I went, my God, that's I thought no one had ever heard of that. It's a B-side on a 1959 7-inch vinyl or something. My dad wrote it. It's typical of the sort of thing my dad would have written, because my dad was one half of a comedy duo. He was part pianist, part comedian, so he kind of fell into that sort of writing. He was Max Miller's musical director.
Oh, really? Wow.
And he used to have a little business card I've got in my collection, and he's kind of got his arm around Dave Allen and Frankie Vaughan and all those kind of people. So he was a bit sort of, some F-list showbiz, my dad, I suppose.
Kudos to Paul Merton for knowing that obscure song as well.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to him about that. How on earth do you know about My Little Budgie?
Yeah. And on the show, did Bruce know the song? Could he remember it?
They sang it. They sang it together.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so, if I remember rightly. Yeah, budgie, 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 and it's just so stupid. Such a stupid tune.
But your music isn't stupid. So did your dad? Where did the link between music and your dad lie? Was he someone that influenced you musically?
No, this is quite an interesting experiment, like social life experiment, because he was not around at all. So anything that he passed on was genetic. He was a travelling musician, and he met my mother. He was in his mid-50s. And he met my mother at the Skyway Hotel at Heathrow Airport. He was doing a residency there, and he was already married to someone else, and he had 4 kids, and then he got involved with my mum. And then I think, so the story goes, she said, "Oh, I want a kid, and I won't bother you about it." And he went, "Oh, all right." And they were quite in love at the time, I think. And so that she had me, and I think after 6 months of him, he was a sort of a clean freak. Of 6 months of him saying, trying to clean my fingernails every time I went out into the garden, she sort of went, "Look, you're all right. You go and deal with your family. I'm all right here." And and then he was quite long distance from that. So he used to ring us. He lived in Brighton eventually, and he used to ring us from a call box every week. He'd tell us a joke, and then when the pips went, he'd kill himself laughing over the punchline. You never heard the punchline. Then the pips would go, and then he'd go, and that was all I ever knew about my dad, was just a series of jokes. And I'd see him every couple of years. So when he was sort of spending a lot of time at my mum's little flat in Hayes in Middlesex, they had so many parties there. He bought an old Zender upright piano, and left it there. And so they used to have parties there. And when he went, he left the piano there, and I was just sort of playing and pressing notes and tinkling about when I was age 4 and 5. And eventually my mum went, "Right, I think it's time to go and get some piano lessons." And I went and visited an old lady called Mrs. Rickson, and I started piano lessons. So anything that came from him, purely genetic. And because he was quite an egomaniac, his 4 children never really got near an instrument. They loved music, but they didn't get involved in music. I was left to flourish. So it's quite an interesting...
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where did Mr. Stevenson come into this?
You don't know Mr. Stevenson, do you?
I don't.
Wow.
I've just done my research.
Oh, you have. You really have. Okay, so I was playing. So I was going to see this old lady for piano lessons, and then they were short of a piano playing teacher at my school in Hayes, Belmore School. So I ended up playing hymns in assembly. There was no one else to do it, and I had my little rotation of about 8 hymns, including Kumbaya and all that stuff that I'd play. And Mr. Stevenson was the borough advisor for music, and he was told about me, and so he came down and he had a look from afar. He was this. He looked about 9 foot to me. He was this. He had the straightest back I've ever seen, and smoked a pipe and sort of shouted, you know. And
I'm terrified already.
yeah, I was, and I actually bumped into him about 30 years later, and I was still terrified. And I couldn't call. His name was Eric. I couldn't call him Eric. I had to call him Mr. Stevenson. Anyway, he decided. It's a beautiful thing, really. He decided that he wanted to teach me. So for nothing, totally for free. So he taught me for 2 or 3 years. Didn't take a penny off my mum because we had no money anyway, and he nurtured me to go to the Royal Academy of Music, which I did on Saturday afternoons, which incidentally I hated, but that's another story. But he passed me on then, and helped give me this incredible classical technique that I draw upon still. You know.
That's what I was going to come to. And even with the little old lady that you mentioned, do you think there's anything technically you still do right now that is living through you, if you like, from her? Do you think?
I don't know if I can trace Mrs. Rixon's teaching in me. Only that at that stage it's the fundaments. It's like just the sort of general knowledge. But there are Mr. Stevenson definitely. There are things that stick with me, and then he passed me on to a beautiful New Zealand lady called Miss Jean Anderson at the Royal Academy, and she also had a fundamental effect on me. But I do remember with him, I remember sitting in a little porter cabin with a piano in it and being in tears as he forced me to sort of sing left-hand parts of two-handed, obviously right and left-handed piano parts, and he would make me sing the left hand to see if my memory could recall it, and he wouldn't let me cheat. And I'd sit there crying until he did. It wasn't nasty. There was a very rare occasion that would happen. But there are fundamental things he taught me, like being able to sing everything you play internally, as a way of memorising things. Memorising things is a key part to your skill set. It gives you so much more. There is so much you can draw upon. My repertoire is terrible. I don't remember things. I don't remember the names of things, but there are passages of Mozart and Shostakovich that they instilled in me that have etched their way into my brain, and the techniques that they used are with me, and they still culture and they still colour how I memorise things. I was shooting a video 2 days ago, and I had to mime a part, and I used all those techniques to learn my own music and to fully understand how I could nail it down to the millisecond, and it's not sort of patting myself on the back, but I feel it's pure hand-me-downs from those guys who gifted me those techniques, and I was reluctant to be taught classical music at the time. I couldn't really understand my place in it, and I ultimately rebelled from it whilst at the Royal Academy. But I am extremely grateful for that neurotic mess that they made me, and I see it in the eyes of ballerinas, and I see it in the eyes of other musicians, those that have been affected. They've got the twitch and the tick from the experience of having it drilled into them, and it means that you become synonymous. You become like almost one with what you're doing, and you almost can't disassociate yourself from it. So all of your emotions and your life are created through it.
So somewhere like the Royal Academy of Music, what were specific things that they did that you think enabled you to success, which you've touched upon a little bit, but also what are things that you would tweak and go, no, that actually was a disabler to progress?
Well, I mean, there were so many disablers to progress that I rebelled. I left midway through a term, and the borough, I think deeply connected with Mr. Stevenson, who was the borough advisor, I think were very angry with me. And they sent me a bill for half a term for £450, which doesn't sound like a lot these days, but we were a single parent family in a masonette in Hayes, and the way that we paid it, or attempted to pay it off, was I got a paper round. I mean, it was
how long that take?
Yeah, well, I
was whole of the next term.
Yeah, I mean, I've still got the backache from the 4 rounds I did every morning. There were many things I did not enjoy about it, feeling that everyone else knew each other on a you know, I was. It's difficult to bring up the class system within this sort of conversation because you can come off quite badly. But I do remember feeling that I was of a certain ilk, and there were others who were not of a certain ilk, and I didn't know my place within it. I think within the sort of private school structure, there's a certain way of commanding or conducting yourself, which I think a lot of children were instilled with, and they just seemed to nail it left, right and centre. You know, they'd go to the choir, they'd sit in groups, they'd understand it. I always felt like a fish out of water. I didn't enjoy choir. I hated theory, but that's innate in me anyway. I didn't like a second instrument. I hated the violin. Sorry, Mrs. Barraclough, who taught me, but I didn't like it so much that they, as they always do, you know, oh, stick them on viola. You know, that's what I was one of those people. Not that the viola isn't a beautiful instrument in its own right, but that's what they tried to sort of sidestep me like that. Really, you know, the things that stuck with me for life was my one-on-one lessons with Miss Anderson, learning the instrument, which I didn't realise it at the time, but I had a fundamental love for at that point. I was very uncomfortable there, very uncomfortable, going on the tube. And it taught me independence. I got to go on the tube, aged 11, you know, on my own every Saturday, past Madame Tussauds on Marylebone Heist, on the A40 there, and into the Royal Academy, and. But I would think I was fundamentally unhappy. I was very sort of holding a lot in. I felt I just didn't feel comfortable. I mean, yeah, your question was, what are the things I learned from it, or things I would unlearn from it? There was no such thing as any kind of contemporary music element at that point. There was none. It was just beginning to come in. Places like the Guildhall started to do it, and Leeds College of Music, they started to do it just after I left there. But I think it was just a sort of a I'm sorry, what kind of attitude. But that's changed, you know, that's changed a lot. I remind myself of what I hear about Albert Finney, because Albert Finney, they claim to be the last sort of, you know, like, backstreet kid they dragged through the grammar school system, and I always felt like Mr. Stevenson, I was a bit of an experiment for him. I think he dragged me through that just to prove a point, and he did it majestically, you know, and I was very happy to be part of it. I think he proved a point through me that I can take this boy, there is talent there, and I'm going to show you, you know. So I take my hat off to him, you know, dear old Mr. Stevenson. So
you're known technically as like an absolute, you know, you're shit hot at what you do, right? So everyone knows that. And even when I just did a few posts earlier about we were doing this interview, people were commenting on that. So my question to you is, when was the last time you saw a piece of music or played a piece of music and went, oh, that's too hard to play?
I don't do that. That's going to sound dreadfully conceited, but I don't. No, I don't.
But when was something you were like, oh, I'm struggling to play, this is so complex or tricky?
Well,
does that happen at your level? That's the question.
The things I find most difficult are unbelievably contemporary 20th century classical pieces where you're being asked to sort of count different bar signatures every other bar, and there are, you know, sort of harmonically challenging. There's nothing there to lead you musically. There's nothing that says, oh, I know what the next bar is going to be. Within contemporary music or anything that I play on that's in the popular music, it's so obvious what's coming, and that doesn't make it bad. It's quite comforting, and it means you can extemporise on top of that. When it comes to sort of what was considered the most difficult classical piece, I suppose the Chopin Etudes, I think, are the ones where you are challenged. But there's nothing. I think that the magic of it refers to what you mentioned before. The magic of the training I've been given is that I might look at it firsthand and go, "Oh, hello," but I have a way round it, and it would take a little bit of work, but I know that I'll get round it. So there's nothing that I would feel challenges me in that way. The only thing that's going to challenge me now is my body breaking down. That will be the moment when I might get a bit frustrated. Would you be able to share what your way of getting around that would be? Would it to buy yourself extra time? Is there a particular technique that you would use to make sure that if you're looking at a piece of music that you might, or listen to a piece of music that I might struggle to do that and I need to perform it very soon, what your shortcuts might be to a young musician listening? Well, there are very. I was reading up about I can't remember his name now, annoyingly, but an expert on scarlatti an American guy. He's a harpsichordist. He's dead now, but he wrote a biography about Scarlatti, and he studied his music, and he has a sort of a 53-point plan as to how you approach each phrase, and I recognised every one of them. I went, oh yeah, I get that. That's been drilled into me, and I hadn't realised it until I read it out like that. And it's like if you're late to a phrase and you've just not prepared correctly. In other words, you've not prepared your arm, your weight of your finger. You've not thought ahead. And if you're playing it, too loudly, and then again your weight is wrong. It's all technique. And I remember I'm sitting here, I'm sitting here showing you my elbow lifted up here. But as I balance my fourth finger on the table, I can remember my piano teachers holding my elbow up to create weightlessness and feeling like I was being dragged away from the piano the whole time. And all the time they were teaching me to just move my weight and help. There's so many things you do that inhibit what you do. Sitting badly, sitting incorrectly, elbows tucked in. There are things that you do and you go, I can't be bothered, to lift. But your body can help you in everything. Your body will get you round those as long as you hold your body correctly. It's not just the finger on the piano. It's the weight. It's the arm helping you along the way. It's the position of your whole body. And then there are things. Then there are simple fundamental techniques like that I swear by, like Hanan and Dochnani, which are just Hanan was, as any pianist will tell you, is the selection of 5-fingered exercises that just go up and down the scales in new and elaborate ways. And then Dochnani claims in his quite short book that by the end of this book you will have a perfect piano technique. And you know what? He's not wrong. There are tongue twisters where you hold all 4 fingers down and then fluctuate between 2 fingers and lift the knuckles high. And there are all sorts of bizarre contortions that he puts you through. But at the end of it, you are shit hot at the end of it.
So you talked about the importance of your body there in regards to enabling you to achieve what you want to. Therefore, do you warm up? And how much? So you're pulling your face. I admit this or not. But just be honest. I've spoken to amazing singers who go, do you know what? No, I don't do any warming up.
Right.
So out of interest, what? And do you have any bad habits, for instance? And do you warm up?
Okay, no. Having said everything I've just said, I do bugger all practice. I don't do any. I do so little practice. It's criminal. I don't know what that says. I don't know what I'd be like if I did practice endlessly, but then I think I'd be a completely different person if I practiced endlessly. I think me not practicing is part of my character, and I think I've muddled through life. I remember doing lessons with Miss Anderson and rehearsing in the room next door, practicing in the room next door 10 minutes before I had the lesson, and that's all I'd done that week. So I don't know where it all, I don't know if they got to me early enough and enough sort of muscle tissue was put in place so that I could cheat my way through life. But essentially, I feel like I'm cheating my way through life by not practicing. I don't warm up. I think as we're sitting here in a period of semi-lockdown, as we're both well aware, and there's been a lot of inactivity during that period, and I do feel rusty when I go there. And it's the first time in my life I've thought I'm not playing enough, I'm not gigging enough, and I do feel a bit rusty, and I think I need to address that as it happens as I'm sitting here now talking to you. But no, I don't do any of that stuff. I'm a bad rehearser and I'm a big gigger, and I believe that the gig is the only thing that inspires me to action is having a bunch of people sitting there looking at me expectantly. It's the only thing that inspires me into action. I'm terribly motivated.
Which gig that you've played do you wish you could re-experience from the audience perspective?
The audience perspective.
Yeah, so which gig have you played that you think, I'd love to go back and just been in the audience for that, and just there's one out.
Someone said to me the other day, what gig what's your favourite gig? It's a fundamental question, but I there was one I played at the Barbican with my trio, and we walked out, the three of us, not really knowing what to expect, and I remember I stopped for a moment and I looked up, and it was one of those gigs where they gave us the ovation first, and I'm not sure why, but it was a magic in the air. And I saw Evan, the drummer, he kind of ran up to me, sort of punched me on the arm, and then bounced like Roo from Winnie the Pooh, a kango across the stage. Super excited, and I wept. I just was moved to tears. I cried because it was just non-stop, and it was a force. It was a force at me, and there was no reason for them to do it other than they were glad to see us, So that's a gig I would like to relive personally. I don't know if I think the one I'm intrigued to see would be we did on the Touch and Flee tour in 2014. We performed the whole album from start to finish. I think that was at the Barbican as well, and it was a strangely deep hypnosis. And I heard talk that people in the we had a break in the middle, and people in the foyer basically said, "What the hell was that?" You know, in a good way. Like I'm not quite sure what happened there. Something changed and shifted, and I was dragged along with something, and it was bloody hard for us. It was hard music, but we did go very, very deep with it, and I would be interested to see what that felt like, whether to see the effect, because you've got no idea.
Do you watch back gigs or listen back to them? I'm sure you can rip something from the desk and listen back to between gigs the night on the coach or anything like that, or the bus.
I'm frightened to do that. I hate. I'm the world's worst self-critic, and it can crucify me if I don't do a 100% gig. And if I hear a mistake, I go to pieces. So I try not to. I listen with one ear. There's one gig that we recorded in Germany. I listened with one ear first, like all huddled up, and then if I've enjoyed that, then I open up and then I enjoy it. And that's actually on YouTube somewhere. Where is it? In Berghausen, I think the place is. Anyway, so I try and avoid that, which is a bad habit again, because you can learn so much from listening back to a gig. You really
and
can.
watch.
Watch. Yeah. No, you can bypass 10 bad gigs if you do that. So it's a bad habit of mine, but it's oversensitivity.
So as we record this, we are during a second kind of wave of lockdown, and I'm quite interested that you discussed earlier before we start recording about kind of being a bit of a nomad and getting out, and where you want to channel your thoughts through your music. But pretty much all the music I've heard of yours is instrumental. So my question is do you channel that through your fingers?
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, I made a conscious decision quite early on to never have vocals, or very rarely have vocals anywhere near my stuff. I was badgered by my family. They used to say, "You've got a lovely voice. Why don't you sing? You'd be so much more successful." That kind of, those kind of conversations. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do the easy way. I'm going to really make an effort to use my clearest and my most skilled voice, and those are my fingers. That's what I'm going to do. It's been hard. There's been times when I thought, I must be mad, but I've been very insistent upon it, and I've gone too far now. I just have to keep going. It's got to be through the piano.
And so if you're writing a new piece of music, in the same way as a lyricist might go, okay, I might write the lyrics first, and this is what I want the music to maybe reflect the tone of the lyrics, or so it's a bit of an experience for a listener. Have you got not lyrics in your mind, but do you have a story or a theme as you're sitting down to write, or does the piano do that bit first and then you write around it?
Something happens when my fingers hit the piano, and then it dictates it from there. That tells me what mood I'm in. So I think I go to the piano with a sort of a kind of a block passage, or like a what's the phrase? Yes, there's a general mood. In fact, the piano really is my mood moderator. I think it tells me what my mood is. I might not even know, and so I sit down at the piano and play, and then that begins to tell me the story. So I do think the piano is a bit like that story about Sparky. I think the piano is playing me to a certain extent. I've been exploring that a lot recently. Funnily enough, I've been exploring personally as to what this piano is to me, and how much of a mirror it is back at me. So I kind of get to the end and I go, well, what was that? And the thing that carries me through from start to finish of a composition, because I tend to find that if I need to record a lot, because I tend to find that I'll sit down and play, and then 3 minutes later I'll have something finished. So I try and capture that quite quickly, or first time off really. I get to the end, and I think the thing that's carried me through is just a sense of melody and harmony and arrangement, an innate sense of it. I don't really think about it, but I think I start playing, a melody just happens. It just happens pretty much every time I kind of do that, something happens, and then a series of well-trodden pathways drag me through, and then I find I'm just playing what seems very obvious to me has to be the melody, and then I get to the end of the tune and I go, well, that's it, and then I go back and analyse it for 6 months and go, it's terrible, it's awful, it's the worst thing I've ever done, and then after 6 months agree actually it's not that bad and actually it's really nice, and then I release it. So the nice bit is when it happens, and then the next nice bit is when in 6 months' time you can listen to it again.
What's the longest you've gone without playing the piano for, and why?
Well, I think it has to be. Again, it's a matter of much moment. I went off. It has to be very recently. I went away. I signed up with a new management company, and they are very much in the electronic field. And I like to challenge myself and push myself in new directions. And I think I took it a few steps too far and tried to please too many others other than myself. And so I bought 53 million bits of kit, as one does. You know, I've got now every drum machine known to man in that studio of mine, and I've got synths and and they were all fantastic. But then I'd get a new instrument, get a new drum machine, I'd play it to death, I'd get an idea out of it, and then I'd sort of go, oh, no, I'm not bored, but I'm like I need something. I'm not getting what I want from this, so I'll try another one. I'll try another one. And in that period, I managed to sort of not play the piano really to any level for months and months and months, maybe even years there.
Wow.
A couple, maybe. And not, when I say not play it, there would be months, maybe, where I wasn't playing the piano in a way that I would call playing the piano. Yeah. I was operating synths and I was recording it, and I'd have snippets, but I wasn't playing the piano. And it was only when I went to Berlin in the middle of last year, I went to Nil Frahms' place, a funk house.
Oh, right, yeah, wow.
Yeah, I just wanted to get away from myself and record some stuff. I went to Berlin, became my,
Bowie moment.
Well, exactly. But I've joked recently that I do remember the reunification of Berlin. I remember it on the TV screens, and I went to Eastern Europe very soon after that and saw what the Soviets left, and I remember that being an amazing moment. And in a way, I ended up back at Berlin reunifying myself because I found the piano. I sat down at Nil Frahms' Yamaha.
Wow.
And I was with Greg, is the engineer I know and producer I know that I was working with, and we sat in that amazingly highly teched studio, and I sat down at the piano and I went, oh my God, I've missed you, and I recorded like half an album in half a day, pretty much. It just flowed, and it was like it was such a moment to realise I'd gone down so many cul-de-sacs, and actually it was waiting for me all the time. I can't get away from the piano. It controls me. It is me. I've loved and hated it. I've hated it as a kid to be forced to practice it. I've loved the opportunities it's given me around the world to travel and meet people. And then hated the way it controls my every move, controls my mood. But when I'm in love with it, I'm really in love with it. And I think I've just entered that period again where I'm really in love with it.
So you played on a lot of records as a kind of an accompanying pianist. Should a pianist in a situation like that get songwriting credits? You can have your long run now.
Right, okay, that's a very good question. I think that's a question on many people's minds as they enter this business, as they get involved and they get pulled in on certain things. And I think those are questions that come into your head very early on in your career because you don't quite know how it works. I think in a way I've learnt to understand the system, and I've learnt to see it from both sides. I mean, I would credit myself that I have learnt to see it from both sides. I think there's. I remember Saida Garrett. She wrote.
So she sang Michael Jackson.
I Just Can't Stop Loving You, and she wrote Man in the Mirror.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, she wrote Man in the Mirror, and she taught me a lot. I went and stayed with her quite a lot.
Did you?
Yeah, in the mid-90s, I went and stayed at her house, and she taught me a lot. And because she was from the Quincy Jones stable and everything else, so I learned a hell of a lot from her. And her adage was always, if you're in the room at the beginning, then you're entitled to a piece of the pie. So she gave me that.
Yeah.
And I think that works both ways. I think that it is true to say that if you're in the room at that sort of conceptual moment, then you probably do deserve a piece of the pie. But then they bring other musicians in. They bring a piano player in, for instance, to elaborate on the idea, or they might have a very set part. And I think as I go by, every scenario is very different. Sometimes they play you an exact part. You think, well, I'm just playing their part. That's all cool. And then there are other times, and very much in the sort of in the height of the DJ, kind of when DJs controlled the whole music business, it felt like it for a while. Maybe in the late 90s, it felt like that for a bit. Every producer I was working with was a DJ, and the whole ethic of a DJ was very different from anything I'd come across before, because they'd sort of mumble something at you, or they'd play you something to rip off. There was a lot of that going on. Yeah. And you question yourself, well, I'm sort of doing all the work here, really. I think I'm coming up with the harmony, I'm coming up with the, but and then you'll come up against a lawyer, and the lawyer will say to you, no, it's melody and lyrics. And they'll say it's Stone with a cold face, and you go, well, yeah, okay, so harmony doesn't count for much then. And they go, no, it doesn't. And you're fighting this what feels like a very lonely battle. An internal battle, right? An internal battle.
And so what advice would you give to someone who goes into the studio and wants to, they might maybe intimidated by a well-known producer, or just like by the surroundings? How you're having that internal thought process.
It's a nightmare.
I know there's probably no perfect right answer for this, but from all your experience, what is the right thing, and how you approach that to kind of raise the eyebrow and go,
Well, that's a very good question, because I can remember of 2 or 3 scenarios where I felt grossly uncomfortable and thought, if I say something here, I could lose everything.
Exactly.
Lose the gig. They know that, or possibly they don't know that. Maybe it's all the pressure that you're putting on yourself. Certainly, I've never felt any great amount of respect coming from the record labels in that regard. You're in an unenviable position, because if you're at the beginning of your career, they're undoubtedly going to say to you, well, if you won't do it, I'll get someone else to do it. Yeah. And that's the narrative in your mind as you're doing it. I had a very interesting scenario recently with an American producer who was very chaotic, hip-hop producer, very chaotic. He was over in London for many, many months. And he was working day and night. And it seemed to me he had people coming in and out of the studio, left, right and centre. He even had the girl from the bar coming in and playing on his record. He was just saying to everyone, come in. And it was in the building where I had a studio, and I got sucked in and come in and play. And I got a sense of my experience and my ability to have a voice, which has taken a long time to get. This is the trouble. My advice is it's not going to come naturally until you're long in the tooth, because only then do you feel like, I've got nothing to lose here. I don't care.
You can afford to say no.
I can afford to say no. I don't need you, and I don't need this. And your power only comes when you're in that position, sadly. And he put me in that position, and he said, oh, just press record, just play something. And I went, right, can I stop you there? If I do that, I'm writing something. Oh, yeah, man, I think everyone should get a piece of the pie. And I went, okay, good, right. And then I did it, and I still felt very uncomfortable about it. And then I got, I had a manager at the time, and I got my manager to talk to their manager, and it was still nasty, it was still horrible, and I never heard those files again, and I got a funny feeling they've been used on something without my permission, but I kept those I said to the engineer, get me those recordings. Please get me those recordings, because I want a copy of those, and I've got a copy of them, just in case I ever come across it. Because there's nothing worse than having the piss ripped out of you. There's just nothing worse, But it's an impossible situation, as we've just illustrated. If you've got everything to lose, you better not open your mouth. It is what you're saying. And if you've got nothing to lose, hey, open your mouth, go for it, and you'll probably succeed. The irony is, you'll probably succeed in your quest.
You've worked with and been in the circle of some of the most powerful personalities in the music industry, in every kind of facet, that is, record labels, etc., etc. What's their biggest weakness?
Repeat that question for me, sorry.
So you've worked with some of the most powerful personalities in the music industry. Looking kind of collectively, what's their biggest weakness?
Their biggest weakness? What's their biggest weakness? Wow. Their biggest weakness? obviously, you're talking about very fragile people here. Their biggest weaknesses are their position. Ironically, it's their position that they're in. Their biggest weakness is the fragility of their position. Their biggest weakness is the fact that they're most of them are dispensable, desperate to succeed. I know some very well-known singers whose sole obsession is units. I mean, pure to sell and stream units. That sounds like, well, that's obvious in the music industry, but I think it's a fundamental mistake. I think you have to take the philosophy that you need to be doing this till the day you drop dead. If that's your philosophy and you maintain that, and that's your ethic, and that fuels it and feeds everything that you do, you'll be okay. If you keep chasing this unit, this stream, this I was saying to someone recently, I read this wonderful book called The Noise of Time by Julian Barnes. And it's set inside Shostakovich's head. I don't know if you've read it. It's a fantastic book, and it's worthy of my attention span. It's like 120 pages long.
Perfect, right.
And that's about as much as I can last in a book. It's a fantastic insight into Shostakovich's mindset and what he was up against. He was up against a system that hailed him as the saviour of the state composer, Russia's Soviet Union's state composer. He was a hero, and Stalin, rubber stamped him. And then 2 minutes later, Stalin called him an enemy of the state. And he spent every night for 6 months on his landing in his building, a building where they'd systematically taken out every single artistic resident and stuck them in Siberia. He sat there waiting for them to arrive for him with a packed suitcase on the landing, because he thought, if I had a packed suitcase and I was ready to go, they won't take my family. And he sat up every night without sleeping, listening to his elevator come up, and then never making it to the floor where he lived. And after 6 months, he decided he was okay, and he gave himself a night's sleep. Now, he was up against a system where he had to please the state. He even went to New York he was allowed to go to New York and appeared on television. And Stravinsky, who he admired, he had to say on TV that Stravinsky was an enemy of the state, even though he admired everything about the man. He admired his music. He had to say that because he had a virtual gun to his head. And his music, he had to try and make his music artistic, even though he had all these criteria to fulfill. Now, I think on this side of the old Iron Curtain, I think we have a hell of a lot of commercial tick boxes we have to tick in order to survive and in order to please. There is, and the whole essence of that is regurgitation, is familiarity. Commercialism loves familiarity, and you're under that pressure. And the more it bends to that system, the more familiar it sounds, the more of a regurgitation it sounds. And your skill as an artist is to try and navigate your way through so that you can feed your family, but you can make something that in 50 years will sound nourishes me exactly, and will sound timeless, will sound as if it's of our... Now, this is a bit of a long-winded way to get to your question.
That slipstream you're talking about there is perfect.
Exactly. So, and I think that that everyone's biggest weakness in the West is that need to be commercial, and it's how you navigate that, how you ride that. Some people go so close to the line, and you wonder how they survive. And they, to me, are the people that you would... In film, I think of Peter Greenaway, like a man who just... It's an autism within him. It's like... art is the thing. It has to be art. I don't know how... And he gets funding, and it's a hard life, man, to do that. But I think
that's the North Star for all creative people.
Totally.
That and it has to be.
Totally.
The moment you start looking at units, it's like,
I think
how is that a measurement of quality or measurement of success?
So I suppose in a surreal, abstract way, people's biggest weakness is their obsession with streams. And by the way, I have that in me. We all have it in us, because there's nothing nicer than to see your work doing well. And how do you register? How do you monitor that? By looking at streams or likes on Facebook or whatever else you're going to monitor it by. It's in us all, and it makes us feel good, but it's a thin drug.
Thank you for sharing. So let's talk about some of the stuff you played. You played with Stereophonics, is that right?
I did, yeah.
Did you a song with Kelly Jones, just the two of you? Is that right?
That's right. Okay. Where are you getting this information from? That's right. I sat on the piano while he sat to the side of me, and that incredible voice. His voice is incredible. It's ridiculous. it's that sort of incredible. Someone called Richard Burton, that sort of that voice from the valleys. You know, it's gravelly and he's only a wee fella, you know, but it's gravelly and large and we got on really well. You know, we got on very, very well. I was called in to do that by Jim Abbis, the producer Jim Abbis,
right.
And Jim has a way of recording which I thoroughly endorse, which is get the studio equipment ready because it's going to happen first take, and that's how I like to work. I reckon it's going to happen first take, and if it doesn't, it will definitely be second, and worst case third.
Had you heard a version that Kelly Jones had played on piano that they asked you to elaborate? So to do first take, like how did you learn the song?
I guess when I say first take, I think I mean it may have been I sat there and they said, "Oh, it's these chords," and it's kind of this pianistic approach. But I say first take is when he sits there with his mic and I sit there with mine, and we go record. That's first take. First, when you feel it, when you feel that essence. But working out probably, took. I mean, I'm without conceit, I'm very quick. I learn quick.
What about song structures and stuff? So, it's fine if they say, right, these are the chords. But what if there's, I don't know, a part of the song that takes a slightly different structure or has it? So, have you got that written out in front of you, or have they just explained it to you, or have you memorised it from a demo? How would you learn that?
Well, obviously, the most joyous thing in the world is when they say to you it's a one-chord wonder. I mean,
okay, fine.
Because then you can just really just enjoy yourself and relax and sit back, and you're not using old logistical brain. Yeah. So you have to try and get past logistical brain. So I use whatever vehicle I can do to get past that and get into old creative brain. Yeah. If it's complicated, I will write it down in a really crude sort of semi-pseudo guitar chord way. Yeah. I won't write staves. I'll just write E with and I'm quite bad at that as well. So I kind of put I might put a little G flat up there, or if there's an odd note, I'll put a tiny little one above it. Also, I'll try. Saida taught me this. I tend to. She does it with lyrics and melodies. I tend to, if it's going up a bit in the scale, I tend to write it a little bit above as a clue, so I know which way I'm going. And so little clues like that. I've got I think a lot of people have got pretty horrible systems that they use. Nice. If it's a one chord wonder, then it's instantly memorised. If it's complicated, I'll use that. But I'll try and get off the page as much as possible. If I can shut my eyes and do it, that's better.
So with something like Make You Feel My Love, was it a case that listen to the Dylan version and then just come in and do it, or did they have an idea of what they were...
Yeah, listen to the... I think I remember that. I think it was at the Townhouse, which is no longer there, in between Shepherd's Bush and Chiswick. And I remember listening to the original. I do remember actually sitting there with the headphones on, listening to the original. And I remember Jim saying... In essence, that's kind of the approach, but I want it more, and I can't remember what he said, but I want it more, and I did that, and then we had it, and again it was Jim Abbis. This is how I think the Stereophonics thing was after, because what happened, the way I met Adele was through Jim Abbis. Or rather, it was through his manager. His manager rang me. Are you all right to talk about this?
Yeah.
His manager rang me on an afternoon in 2007, and it was a girl called Lucy, and I hadn't spoken to her in about 10 years. And she went, "Hello, Neil." And hi. She went, I manage a producer called Jim Abbey, so he's going in the studio in the morning with this new girl. She's called Adele, and it's kind of the first time she's recorded. She's got a band from Brit School, because I think she was at Brit School. She's got a band from Brit School, but the keyboard player's decided he wants to keep his job at Sainsbury's because he doesn't think the band's going anywhere. So do you want to do it?
173 million streams later.
Yeah. It hurts. It hurts on his behalf. I hadn't done sessions for about 5 or 6 years before that. I'd kind of gone, no, I'm not doing any more, pretty much. And I went, oh, right. So I turned up the next morning. And there she was, and she must have been 17 at the time or something, or 18. And hello. And then they set her up on one side of the room and me on the other side. And Jim did his, let's get this in one take mentality. And I sat down and she got over there behind a glass screen. And again, it was like, oh, these are the sort of chords and kind of this style, quite broken arpeggiated stuff. And I went, oh, okay. And then he pressed record, and then I looked round and sort of Jim was like hairs on the back of the neck thing, and I hadn't I felt it was good, it felt good, and people ask me about this, you must have thought at the time, wow, here's a superstar. No, I didn't.
No.
I just thought, she's cool. She's good. She nailed it. She's a one-take wonder. That's good. We'll get this done in no time. And Jim went, whoa, that's pretty special. Well, we probably recorded another couple of takes, but I think that was the one. And because that worked so well and that was such a magical moment, Jim always employed that with Adele and myself. We always did it, nearly always. No, in fact, we always did it in the same room at the same time, and then other stuff was built around it. So it would always just be me and her. Violins would come on another day, drums on another day. Mainly, I think pretty much, yeah, it was like that. That was the magic formula, and so it became a thing, the arpeggiated piano thing and her, and then it went away, for a couple of, or 18 months, and then it started turning up everywhere. As I joke, every time my wife used to watch, the X Factor or whatever it was at the time, and every time someone got sent home, I'd hear my arpeggiated piano coming over the thing, and it was sad o'clock. You haven't made judges' houses, and off they'd go. And it was me, and I go, this is obviously taking off. And that first album did very well, but
second album.
But then it was the second album that went ballistic. But it pretty much since 2008 when that came out. Maybe about 6 months after that, I've relentlessly heard myself in every public place that I ever go, and it's because of that record.
That's a bit of a measurement of success, I would say.
Well,
I know you.
Yeah.
You can't argue it. I mean, that
No.
you say that to any young musician. It might not be exactly what you for your own stuff and stuff like that. But come on.
But this is the thing, you see.
And such a prominent part as well, particularly on that track.
Absolutely. I think the negatives are very small. I think the positives are huge because. It's just a moment in time that those records are a moment. She's a moment in time.
And so then the second album comes along. So Rolling in the Deep. So as of about an hour and a half ago, I checked the world's population is 7.8 billion people. I then saw that one video alone of Rolling in the Deep has 1.7 billion views. I mean, how is that possible? And that's just on one video. That doesn't include all the other streams elsewhere, and people download it. Tell us about that, because that's quite different. That's quite upbeat and quite funky and a bit disco, and your piano is quite prominent towards the end in that. What do you remember about recording that? Was that with Paul Epworth?
It was with Paul Epworth. Yeah, that was very different. That was a new experience, and not like anything I'd done with her before. Because again, it had all been with Jim Abbas up to that point, and it was all in the room, and we did it together, and we had to get it right together. Paul Epworth's method was very different. It was, here's the part, the drums are already down, the bass is already down. I want you to play for me for the next 2 hours, the same thing again and again and again until I've got what I want. So she was in the booth. Adele was in the booth, and I was at the piano. I sneakily recorded it on video, just for posterity. And at the end of it, you hear her go, "Oh yeah, that was all right," But the take that I recorded for posterity probably wasn't the one that they used. I imagine it was quite a composite part. I'm not sure. But it was very different. It was a much less. It wasn't about the moment. It was about nailing the production, and I think presumably that's how Paul works. He's like, I want the perfection. I want the right timbre and the right. And we experimented with up this octave or down that octave, and could you go a little bit more aggressive here? And so I felt like Paul was playing, through me in a way, a bit more than Jim's like, hey. Yeah. Enjoy yourself, mate. It was a bit more like that, I would say. But I thought when I walked in and I heard it, and it was at that little studio in Ladbroke Grove. When I heard it, I thought, that's a good pop record, and it had that sort of essence of soul pop, which I'd always sort of related to. And I thought, yeah, this is easy to play. In other words, it just feels right. This feels like a good pop record.
You're in an interesting position there, given that there's obviously certain times where a first record's done really well, and it's kind of the pathways. We know the second record is going to be big, but we're only just recording it now, and that's in everybody's mind at the time. Like, did you sense that oh, there's a bit more riding on this, or because I can imagine a lot of people tighten up in that situation. It's just like, right, there's this record's going to be massive, right? So come on, everyone, this is going to be great. And that expectation is just like, so did you sense that at all? Or was there a relaxed environment? And if so, how was that created?
I think I didn't sense it personally. This is what I like about those situations. The irony of, as you say, you know, there's ridiculous statistics. Is 1 billion people have listened to that or watched that video. So is that it was, you know, if you total together the amount of hours I spent in the room with Adele doing those, it's probably about 4.5 hours. You know, I mean, really, it's and so I've always enjoyed that situation because I can walk in with a swagger. It doesn't mean anything to me personally. I care and cry and get cross about everything that I do artistically beyond that. But that is a moment where I can stick another hat on and be a bit of a cocky so-and-so, really, because I know I'm good at it. You know, again, not being... it's because I don't care about it. I'm not invested in it in the heart. So I can enjoy it and just go, I'm bloody good at this, you know, and just muck about and play about. And then my responsibility ends when I walk out that studio. What a joyous situation for me, you know. Hand it over and best of luck with the success. And then I just watch it for the, you know. But I mean, regarding other people, I didn't see it affect her. I saw her. I think she's always been very sure of herself. In my experience of her, very sure of her strengths, very sure of her path, and very sure of her quest for success. And also I always got the impression she was very sure when it was wrong, and she wasn't going to put up with it unless it was right. So I think there were huge swathes of tracks that got recorded in America that ultimately she went, nah, I think my British team would do this better. And I think that may have been when I was brought in to do a few of the other tracks on that second album. Is I think that they went to America and then came back, and she just went, no, I think they can do it better. And she, you know, she was proved right. So there are tracks like Take It All is on that record, and there's another. There's about 3 or 4 I'm on that second one. And that was coming back home, you know, that was coming after being 3-4 months in America and residence and trying a whole bunch of stuff with some very big name producers, obviously, because they're all desperate to get their hands on her. But she had the courage to go, actually, no, I know who my boys are, you know, and bringing it back home. So that worked for her. Again, it worked well for her.
So new record for you in February, is that right?
New record for me in February, yeah.
So how's that gone recording? So did you record that just before the lockdown kicked in?
And that's all. That was recorded over the last couple of years, and as I said before, I was recorded a lot of it in Berlin. I produced a lot of it in Berlin, and It was the other side of the coin. It was the other hat where it's just internal exploration and pain and agony and anguish and self-doubt and all that other stuff. That's the joyless side of the art, where the art hurts to express. So it's a completely polar opposite of what we've just discussed, you know, really.
And where are we at as we record, you know, in October now? Is it mixed? Is it mastered? Is it ready to go?
Yes, it's all mixed.
Recording videos as well. Is that for...
Yep, that's it. It's all mixed and mastered, and I've been recording a bunch of videos in a few have been released recently in empty venues, which is quite symbolic.
Cadogan Hall? Or was it not? What's the one on your website, on the front page of your website, that's like you walk onto a stage? I thought it was Cadogan Hall, where it's like
St George's
church or...
Is it St George's in Bristol?
Oh, is it? Right, okay, fine, right.
Yeah.
Your videos are all amazing. By the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, well, I've got a wonderful team, and you know, everyone's so dedicated to the art of it, and I suppose, you know, if you do jump into this instrumental way of expressing yourself, you've got to jump in hard, and that's what everyone's done, I think, you know. And the other day I recorded I've got this system built where I've got a selection of old black and white and colour TVs from the 70s on top of my piano and around my piano that I'm able to. We've devised a system where I'm able to play it via a pickup in the piano. I can connect a jack to the RF aerials of all of them, and I can play the wavelength. So if you watch the static, if I play a note, suddenly the static forms a shape, and if it's a low shape, the static is very wide. The waves are very wide. If it's a high note, the static is very thin lined. So I have these tone pictures that I'm able to play through the TVs, and that's developed. And then I got this director on board from a company called Anglo Digital, a guy called Will, who jumped on board with this and elaborated, and I ended up in a warehouse a few nights ago with about like 40 tellies around me, all doing this static, some showing other imagery, and on a pool of water. So it's the album is called Hall of Mirrors, and it's about the various mirrors that I was able to create with the piano, because I do feel passionately, as I alluded to before, that the piano is very much a mirror with me. It reflects back on me who I am, and without it, I don't have that introspection anymore. I get lost. I lose my center. I had to go through a selection of metamorphoses to get back to where I needed to be. So this Hall of Mirrors is differently recorded, differently produced pianos, different pianos, and rather, I suppose, symbolised by all these televisions that are just reflecting things. And now the fact I'm able to play these little static mirrors as well, it all becomes intertwined. These things become so metaphoric in the end.
So how are you going to produce that live when the gig venues start opening again? I guess that's going to be quite interesting visually.
Well, exactly. I can do it. The only technical problem is they hum like crazy through any kind of wire. So I do have that. I have to get a selection of humbucker style pickups for my piano, but that's the full intention, is to replicate that live. I mean, if you come to my studio, where I've got them all set up in there, and people come for little private concerts, it mates of mine just to sit there and sort of meditate over these TVs doing things as I play the piano, and it helps with the improvisation. It reflects back at me. So again, I get a joy out of playing a low note and then watching those waves just sit there in big thick form, in thick blobs, and it's a beautiful thing. It inspires me.
Most people listening to this will be listening on a podcast platform. Tell us about your new podcast, The Looking Glass.
Yes, well,
people should go subscribe to it right now.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, well, that was. I'm trying to think how it. I think it was a. I had a selection of musical friends come to my studio and sit on my couch and kind of pour out their hearts. I'm sure you've experienced very similar. I one in particular, Holly Walker singer from Marabou State. She came over a few times, and we got really deep into these conversations about what it really means to do what we do, and it's more tuned into that side of the painful side rather than the. We discuss it, in fact, in the podcast, that there are certain areas of music where it just puts a big smile on your face, and you're able to sit there and just feel joyous. We do touch on that, but I'm kind of more interested into that agonising, that painful side, where you really feel like you're giving birth to something, or you're exorcising something. And what is that deep relationship? The relationship between me and my piano it really is about that love-hate thing, and how it does. If I play it a lot, my mood is better. If I ignore it, my mood is worse. My mental health seems to revolve around my relationship with the piano and my relationship with music. And I wanted to see if other people felt that way, and it seems to me that they really do. People are guided and driven and controlled by their chosen form of expression.
It's no greater endorsement to have a creative outlet, even if you're playing to an empty room or if it's just for yourself. I think it's really important that we always have a creative outlet from a well-being point of view. Yeah. Okay, we're going to begin to wrap up. One burning question I have from listening to your back catalogue is, who's Kenny Two Steps?
That's my Uncle Ken, no longer with us, sadly. My Uncle Ken was a great musical influence on my life. He used to put huge John Barry soundtrack records on massive headphones when I was about 6 and put them on my head and go, listen to that, son, he had this amazing dance where he just, everything below the hips moved and nothing above the hips did, and I think it got rolled. It morphed into Kenny Two Step. God knows why. Silly phrases, silly things.
And tell us, you played later with Jules Holland.
Did with,
a few years ago, right? So a lot of young musicians, they, particularly people in the UK based, they may end up doing that show. That always strikes me as a very different production from other TV shows, the way they do it, because it's live and in the round. Well, how was that experience, and anything really stick out to you as being different to anything else you've done from a TV point of view?
Yeah, well, obviously, just its sheer gravity, doing that show is great. I mean, the funny thing behind that is that I was asked by Adele's manager to do that show with her, and I said no because I was waiting for my band to get on there, and he kind of went, "Oh right," like as if to say, and then by a complete coincidence, about 2 days later, they were due to have some American band flying, and they cancelled it. The producer rang my manager and said, "Oh, does Neil want to come on with his trio?" So I turned up, and she was there with the manager, and he went, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm playing with my band." It was one of those beautiful.
You sure
moments.
That was coincidence?
No.
Are you sure that's coincidence? Like someone saying to someone to something?
I don't know, but it was a beautiful thing. So she was on it. It was one of her first performances on it, and then we were on it, and it was also, I think, if not the first, then one of the first live shows, because they never used to do it live.
Yeah, right.
It was pre-recorded up to that point. I'd done it before with other bands, but did it differ from others? I think just as I say, the sheer gravity of that, and James Taylor was on the same show. These are legends that you get on there, and I enjoyed having you get the little insights as to what actually goes on, and like at the end of my performance, I went over to Jules, and the audience were applauding, so you couldn't hear, and he just whispered in the ear, went, "That was effing great," and I thought, "Oh, great endorsement," it was just it's that lovely facing the other bands thing that you get on that. I mean, I've experienced it before. There was a show called The White Room I did where they had that similar thing, and I was.
Who was that with? Who did you play that? Would that be
Brand New Heavies?
Brand New Heavies.
Yeah, Brand New Heavies, which that I learnt all my my basics for touring and recording through those guys in the mid-90s. They taught me a lot, and that's back when I was wearing flared trousers and had the long hair, and I that was the best band I could have ever been in. That band, it was fantastic for that.
And you played on Midnight at the Oasis?
I did play on Midnight at the Oasis. Yeah, that was about the first recording I did with them. I'd had a terribly bad time in my late teens with a band called the Pasadenas. We toured Japan and France, and I was kind of felt like I was bullied. I was like a young 18-year-old with acne, and I'd answered
That'll be why.
Yeah, well, I was landed the slaughter. I'd answered an ad in Melody Maker and got that gig, and it was a bad experience. And I went back to inverted commas the pubs for a few years after that because it was awful. And then next thing, when I was 21, I auditioned for the Brand New Heavies, and I knew their material very well. I kind of told them what I wanted to play, so that was a beautiful thing. And Midnight at the Oasis, I think, was the first record I recorded with them. And I think it was a top 10 hit and all that stuff. Yeah, it was great. And
did you do anything with Rihanna?
I did do something with Rihanna. It was in the middle of the night, driving down the A3... How mundane is this? Driving down the A316, I got a call...
No Rihanna story has ever started like that.
Well, no, this is it. It's giving you something unique here. Driving down the A316, and I got a phone call from New York from... the manager, a woman saying, "Oh, I'm the manager of Rodney Jerkins," and I laughed. I thought it was a joke name, and she went, "No, this is the manager of Rodney." And I later found out he was a big producer. He's in town, and he wants that guy who played on the Adele record. He wants for a track he's doing with Rihanna, and it's at Metropolis. And do you want to come over on Tuesday evening? So I turned up there on 10 o'clock at night. I think I was called in, and she wasn't there actually. Yeah. But I played on about 3 tracks, and I that's the thing. You play on a record, as the Adele records, and people want a bit of that. They want a bit of hit sprinkle. It's like when is it Clyde Stubblefield or Bernard Purdie? I think he used to have a sign on the front of his drum that said "You done booked the hit maker," and I think everyone wants a piece of that. And that's when you've got enough lottery tickets out there, and you suddenly one cashes in, and it leads to others, and that would be that.
But the magic fairy dust was the fact that you and Adele were probably you were in the same room opposite each other at the same time, creating that live piece of music. Yeah. And so they tried to kind of retrofit that with Rihanna, with her not being there.
Well, this is it.
So that's how to do it.
Well, no joke, but the arpeggiated piano I think that's what overwhelms me, and I don't know how I feel about it. But the arpeggiated piano part, or the repeated stuff like Rolling in the Deep, or Hometown Glory, or Make You Feel My Love, all this arpeggiated piano, it became the zeitgeist for about 7 years. You know,
it's your fault.
It's my fault. You know, sorry everyone. So everyone wants a piece of that, and that's the record industry for you. It tries to replicate, always tries to replicate.
So, final question. This is a question we ask to everyone on the podcast. What fears do you have for the music industry, and how might those fears be addressed? What needs to change? Well,
I mean, at this time, there are so many fears for the music industry. It's hard to have sympathy for the music industry when you're a musician, because you feel like you've been utilised and used. You know, you've been spat out by it so many times. I was saying to someone the other day, it's very rare you can think of an industry where a large proportion of the people in it don't actually produce what it produces. You know, they look after the commodity that the small percentage produce. It's quite a unique situation. But I do have fears and concerns and cares for the music industry, because I think it's, you know, you rely on that sort of group of people. You rely on those people to fuel your momentum. I reside. I've got a studio in a building that has other studios in it, and is a business concern. And I know how much work and effort has gone into building an environment for people to come and make music in. And I don't think that I think the big conglomerates don't recognise that enough. They don't look after the grassroots people enough. And I'm not just talking about musicians. I'm talking about people who just, you know, run studios or make the tea. I mean, literally, there's kids who are desperate to be involved in the industry, stupid though it seems, desperate to be involved, and no one gives a crap, you know, or they do, but not at that level. Someone said to me, you know, the other day, if you really want to help with this lockdown, you want to make a statement about how badly we're affected, then why doesn't Spotify shut down for a day and see how that feels? You know, join the club, join the pain. I'm on the positive side. I'm always amazed about how this industry it changes, it flexes. There was a period there when CDs sort of started to tail off and streams came into play, where the independent artist and the independent label and the independent musicians had quite a corner of the market there. They were, I don't know if many people clocked onto it, but you were, if you owned the rights to your music, you were able to kind of do quite well. I put out a track called Grace. And it's got put on one of those big playlists, you know, and it's 17 million streams later. Wow. I owned the rights, and it paid. My quest throughout this, whatever I do, is to pay for the art. Yeah. I'm not here to make money per se. I'm here to pay for the art. Yeah. And Grace paid for a lot of my art because I owned the rights to it. And I think people mistakenly think that someone is screwing them over when they get confused. It's not necessarily Spotify that are. It's just that there are ways around it. There was a time there where the independent artist, independent businessman could flourish, and then I think the majors clocked onto it and bought into everything. But it permanently fluctuates like that. There's always you've got to be open to opportunity, open to innovation. You've got to see the opportunities. You've got to be, you know, like Frank Zappa is one of the biggest influences for me, because he was a man who looked after his art. Yeah. And he was a small businessman. That's what you've got to be. You've got to be a small businessman, and you've got to look after your art. And I've throughout my life I've been a big advocate of getting your rights back, as in owning your work. Getting those back. I own a bunch of virtually all my work I own, and some of it, most of it, you know, never makes a penny, but it's there. Yeah. You know, and it is like buying a ticket. You buy loads of tickets, and eventually one comes in, and then that pays for a whole bunch more. And all I'm ever trying to do in life is to draw a map through my life, financing and funding the art that I want to make, and I wear various hats in order to do that. And if I wear a hat for 2 hours in a studio with Adele, and the money that comes from that pays for my art, that's I've achieved. That's my job. That's my goal achieved. It's not to be. I've never wanted to be the big session player. It's only been a vehicle to fund something that I really care about. Whether anyone cares about it as much as you care about it, that's a whole different question. But I care about it, and I think everyone should think like that. They should really nourish and cherish their art, and do whatever they have to do to protect it. And it's a long struggle. It's a long, hard struggle. And it's frightening sometimes. You feel so alone. Sometimes you are literally alone. But you can do it. And you've got to hang in there. Just hang in there. As long as you protect your art, you'll be okay. And then you will do it till you die.
That's a great blueprint for any young musician or any creative person listening to this podcast. And thank you so much, Neil, for appearing. Your wisdom, your guidance, your experience, your talks of the A136, I think it was. You've played on records that will genuinely be played for generations. Thank you so much for appearing. You've got the new album out in February called Hall of Mirrors, and the podcast as well, The Looking Glass, which I'm looking forward to checking out as well. So thanks so much for appearing on the StageLeft podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.